The notification came through while I was replacing the alternator on a '98 Silverado. Grease under my nails, socket wrench still warm in my palm. My phone lit up on the workbench with that familiar blue glow. Someone tagged you in a post. I wiped my hands on the red shop rag hanging from my belt and swiped it open without thinking much of it. That's when I saw her. My wife. Rachel. Smiling in a way I hadn't seen in months, maybe years. Her head tilted back in laughter, champagne glass catching golden hour light, and his arm draped across her shoulders like he owned the moment. The caption read, "When you finally find someone who gets your vibe. Cheers to new chapters." 3 fire emojis. 27 likes already. And the man holding her wasn't me. His name was floating right there in the tag. Bryce Kellerman. I didn't know him. But I was about to. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Carter Mitchell. 42 years old. I run a small auto repair shop on the east side of Portland called Mitchell's Garage. 3 bays, 2 lifts, and a coffee pot that's been brewing the same bitter sludge since 2009. I've been married to Rachel for 11 years. We met at a fundraiser for the community center where she used to volunteer. She wore a yellow sundress and laughed at my joke about carburetors. I thought I'd won the lottery. For a long time, maybe I had. But somewhere between the second mortgage and her new job at the marketing firm downtown, the laughter stopped landing the same way. She started working late. Started caring about her appearance in a way that felt less like self-care and more like audition. New perfume. Hair appointments every 3 weeks instead of every 2 months. Gym membership she actually used. I told myself it was healthy. Growth. Independence. All the words people use when they're scared to ask the real question. I stared at that photo for a full minute in the fluorescent hum of my shop. The Silverado ticked as it cooled. My apprentice, Jamie, was out front dealing with a walk-in customer. The world kept turning while mine tilted off its axis. I clicked on Bryce Kellerman's profile. Public account. That was my first break. His bio read, brand strategist. Adventure seeker. Living my best life. The kind of bio that tells you nothing and everything at once. I scrolled. There she was again. 3 photos down. Rachel at a rooftop bar with a skyline behind her. Rachel hiking some trail I'd never heard of, hair pulled back in a ponytail, cheeks flushed from exertion or excitement or both. Rachel in his passenger seat, sunglasses on, windows down, the kind of candid shot that only happens when someone's comfortable with the person holding the camera. Each post had captions that danced right up to the line without crossing it. Good company makes every view better. Some people just make life easier. Grateful for the real ones. I clicked back to the first photo, the one where I'd been tagged. That's when I noticed something that made my jaw tighten. In the comments, someone had written, "You two are glowing. So happy for you." And Bryce had replied with a single red heart. Not Rachel. Him. Like he was claiming it. Like he wanted the world to see. I took a breath that felt like swallowing glass and kept scrolling. That's when I found her. Tagged in a photo from 2 months ago. A family photo. Bryce with his arm around a blonde woman in a blue sweater, 2 kids in front of them grinning at the camera. The caption, "My whole world." Her name was in the tag. Jennifer Kellerman. I clicked through to her profile. Private account. Profile picture showed her and the kids at a pumpkin patch. Her bio said, "Mom of 2. Trying my best. Coffee enthusiast." I set the phone down and leaned against the workbench. My hands were shaking. Not from anger yet. From recognition. That feeling you get when all the weird little moments suddenly line up and form a picture you didn't want to see. Rachel's late nights that smelled like wine and something floral I couldn't place. The way she angled her phone away from me when she texted. How she'd started talking about her coworkers in that vague, breezy way that gave no details but took up a lot of words. Bryce wasn't a coworker. I'd have remembered that name. I pulled up Rachel's Instagram. She barely posted anymore, but when I scrolled back 3 months, there he was in the background of a group photo. Some office happy hour. His face half cropped out but unmistakable. That was the night she'd come home smelling like gin and told me she was too tired to talk. I picked up the socket wrench and finished the alternator job on autopilot. Tightened the bolts. Reconnected the battery. Tested the ignition. The engine roared to life, clean and strong, and I felt nothing. Jamie poked his head into the bay and gave me a thumbs up. I nodded. When he left, I pulled out my phone again and did something I'm not proud of but won't apologize for. I requested to follow Jennifer Kellerman. Then I sat in my truck in the parking lot and waited. The sun dropped behind the buildings. The streetlights buzzed on. My phone stayed silent. Rachel texted me at 6:15. Working late again. Don't wait up. Love you. I stared at those last 2 words like they were written in a language I used to speak. I didn't respond. I drove home to an empty house that still smelled like her lavender lotion and made myself a sandwich I didn't eat. The next morning, Jennifer Kellerman accepted my follow request. I was pouring my first cup of coffee when the notification came through. My hand stayed steady. I opened her profile and started from the beginning. She posted often. Photos of her kids at soccer practice. A book club meeting. A half marathon she'd run last spring with a time written in the caption like she was proud but humble about it. There were photos of Bryce, too, but they had a different quality. Stiff smiles. Staged moments. The kind of pictures you post because you're supposed to, not because you're feeling it. The most recent photo of him was from 3 weeks ago. A family dinner at some Italian place. He wasn't looking at the camera. He was looking at his phone. I scrolled back to Rachel's Instagram and lined up the dates. 3 weeks ago, she'd posted a photo of a latte with the caption "Treat Yourself Tuesday." The location tag was a coffee shop 2 blocks from that Italian restaurant. Coincidence is just laziness wearing a disguise. I sat at my kitchen table and made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to confront. I was going to let the truth do the work. I opened Bryce Kellerman's profile again and found the photo of Rachel with the champagne glass. The one where he'd captioned it "New Chapters." I clicked the 3 dots in the corner. Tag someone. I typed Jennifer Kellerman's name and hit enter. Then I went to the next photo. The rooftop bar. Tagged her again. The hiking trail. Tagged. The passenger seat candid. Tagged. I went back 6 weeks, tagging Jennifer in every single post where Rachel appeared, and even a few where she didn't but the caption had that same smug energy. Living my truth. No regrets. Some risks are worth taking. By the time I was done, I'd tagged her in 14 posts. Then I set my phone down, finished my coffee, and drove to the shop like it was any other Wednesday. The fallout started faster than I expected. By noon, my phone was buzzing with texts from Rachel. "What the hell are you doing? Carter, call me now. This is insane." I let them pile up like invoices I'd get to eventually. Around 1:30, Jamie brought me a turkey sub from the deli across the street and asked if I was okay. I told him I was fine. He didn't believe me, but he didn't push. That's the thing about working with your hands all day. It teaches you when to leave a man alone. I pulled the transmission on a Honda Accord and let the rhythm of the work keep my mind from spinning out. Drain the fluid. Disconnect the linkage. Support the weight. Every step deliberate. Every movement practiced. There's a peace in mechanical problems. They don't lie. They don't make excuses. They either work or they don't. At 3 o'clock, my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something told me to pick up. "Hello?" The voice on the other end was careful. Female. A little shaky. Is this Carter Mitchell? It is. There was a pause. I could hear kids laughing in the background. Then she said, "This is Jennifer Kellerman." I set down the wrench and walked out to the parking lot where the noise wouldn't carry. "I figured you might call. Did you tag me in those photos?" Her voice wasn't angry. It was something worse. It was tired. "I did." Another pause. Longer this time. "Why?" I leaned against the side of my truck and watched the traffic roll by on Burnside. "Because I thought you should see what I was seeing." She made a sound that might have been a laugh or might have been something breaking. "How long have you known?" "About a day," I said. "But I've suspected for a while." She was quiet for so long I thought she'd hung up. Then she said, "He told me he was working late. Rachel told me the same thing." That's when I heard it. The shift. The moment she stopped being careful and started being real. He's been different for months. Distracted. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Secretive. I thought maybe it was stress from work. Or a midlife thing. I didn't think he'd actually. She trailed off. I didn't fill the silence. I'd learned that sometimes the most respectful thing you can do is let someone sit with their own sentence. When she spoke again, her voice was steadier. "I confronted him an hour ago. Showed him the tags. He tried to spin it. Said she was just a friend. That you were being paranoid and dragging me into it. What do you think?" I asked. "I think my husband has 14 photos of another woman on his Instagram and I didn't know any of them existed until today." We stayed on the phone for another 10 minutes. She asked questions. I gave answers. We compared timelines like detectives working the same case from different angles. The late nights. The new habits. The way they both started talking about work trips that didn't quite add up. By the end of the call, we weren't strangers anymore. We were two people standing in the rubble of the same earthquake. Before she hung up, she said, "Thank you. I mean it. I needed to know." "So did I said. And I meant it." When Rachel came home that night, I was sitting at the kitchen table with a beer I hadn't touched and a calmness that must have scared her more than yelling ever could. She dropped her bag by the door and stood there with her arms crossed. "You tagged his wife, Carter." "His wife? Do you have any idea what you've done?" I looked at her. Really looked. The woman I'd married had green eyes that used to find mine across a crowded room. Now they barely landed. "I gave her the same information I had," I said. "That's all." "That's all?" "You humiliated me. You made me look like some kind of homewrecker." I took a sip of the warm beer and set it down carefully. "I didn't make you anything, Rachel. I just showed someone what was already there." She opened her mouth. Closed it. Tried again. "It's not what you think." That phrase. The one every betrayed spouse hears like it's supposed to be a life raft. I shook my head. "I don't think anything." "I know. I saw the photos. I read the captions. I followed the trail you left because you got careless or maybe because part of you wanted to get caught. Either way, we're here now." Her face did something complicated. Anger and guilt and fear all fighting for space. "We need to talk about this." "We are talking." "No," she said, and her voice cracked just a little. "We need to really talk. About us. About what's been happening." I stood up and pushed the chair in like I was closing a chapter. "I'll sleep in the guest room tonight. Tomorrow, we'll figure out what comes next. But right now, I don't have anything else to say." I walked past her and felt the air move between us. Cold. Final. She didn't follow me. I heard her crying later, soft and muffled through the wall, and I felt something in my chest twist. But I didn't go to her. Some bridges you don't rebuild in the dark. You wait for daylight and see if there's anything left standing. The next morning, my phone exploded. Not with Rachel's messages, but with notifications from Instagram. Bryce Kellerman had deleted every photo I'd tagged Jennifer in. All 14 of them. Gone. Scrubbed. Like they'd never existed. But the internet is a patient historian. I'd taken screenshots the night before. Every single one. I didn't post them. I didn't send them anywhere. I just kept them in a folder labeled evidence because I'd learned a long time ago that the truth has a way of maturing when you least expect it. Rachel left for work early without saying goodbye. I made eggs and toast, fed the neighbor's cat that had started showing up on my porch, and drove to the shop with the radio off. Silence has a way of making you honest with yourself. By the time I pulled into the parking lot, I'd made a decision. I wasn't going to chase her. I wasn't going to beg. I was going to give her a choice and let her live with whatever she picked. That afternoon, Jennifer Kellerman called again. This time her voice was different. Stronger. He's moving out, she said. No preamble. No small talk. Just the facts. When? This weekend. I told him I wanted him gone by Sunday. I leaned back in my office chair and stared at the ceiling tiles that had been water-stained since before I bought the place. How are you holding up? Honestly? I don't know yet. The kids keep asking questions I don't have answers for. But I keep thinking about what you said yesterday. About how you'd suspected for a while. I did too. I just didn't want to believe it. Yeah, I said. That's the part that stings the most. She laughed, bitter and short. He tried to blame you, you know. Said you were crazy. That you'd manipulated the whole thing because you were jealous or controlling or whatever excuse made him feel better. I told him to save it. That I'd seen enough. We talked for 20 minutes. She told me about the other signs she'd ignored. A credit card charge at a hotel in Seattle when he was supposed to be at a conference in Denver. A woman's earring she'd found in his car that he said belonged to a colleague who'd needed a ride. The way he'd started showering as soon as he got home, every single time, like he was washing something off. I told her about the lemon cleaner. About how Rachel had started deep cleaning the house on Friday nights when she used to be too exhausted to even think about it. About the new lingerie I'd found in the laundry that she'd never worn for me. We were trading war stories, and in some strange way, it helped. Before we hung up, Jennifer said something that landed in my chest and stayed there. I'm not going to let him rewrite this story. He made choices. So did she. And we get to decide what we do with that. Yeah, I said. We do. When Rachel came home that night, I was ready. I'd printed out the bank statements. Highlighted the charges that didn't make sense. Dinner at a steakhouse on a Tuesday when she'd texted me she was working late. A hotel room in a river on a weekend she'd said was a solo wellness retreat. Flowers from a boutique I'd never heard of, purchased on our anniversary, that I'd never received. I laid them out on the kitchen table like a hand of cards I was finally ready to play. She walked in and saw them immediately. Her face went pale. Carter. Sit down, I said. Not loud. Not mean. Just clear. She sat. I stayed standing because I needed the height. Needed to feel like I was the one in control of this moment, even if everything else was chaos. I'm going to ask you one question, I said. And I need you to answer it honestly. Not the version you've been practicing in your head. Not the one that makes you feel better. The truth. She nodded, and I saw her hands shaking in her lap. Are you in love with him? The question hung there between us like smoke. She looked down. Looked at the statements. Looked everywhere but at me. When she finally spoke, her voice was so small I almost didn't hear it. I don't know. That answer told me everything. If she'd said no, there might have been a thread to pull. If she'd said yes, at least it would have been honest. But I don't know meant she was still deciding. Still weighing her options. still treating me like a backup plan while she figured out if the other guy was worth the risk. I nodded once. Okay. Okay? She looked up, confused. That's it? That's it, I said. Because I'm not going to compete for my own wife. I'm not going to audition for a role I've already been cast in. You either want this marriage or you don't. But I need you to decide without me begging you to choose me. Her eyes filled with tears. Real ones, I think. Carter, it's not that simple. It actually is, I said. You've been seeing him for months. You've lied to me. You've spent money we don't have on a life I was a part of. And when I found out, you didn't apologize. You got defensive. So yeah, Rachel. It's that simple. Do you want to be here or not? She stood up, shaking. I need time. Take it, I said. But take it somewhere else. I'll stay here. You go stay with your sister or a friend or wherever. But I'm not doing this dance where we tiptoe around each other and pretend everything's fine until you decide what you want. I'm worth more than that. She stared at me like I'd just spoken a language she didn't recognize. Then she grabbed her purse and walked out. I heard her car start. Watched the headlights sweep across the living room wall. And then she was gone. The house felt bigger after she left. Not empty. Bigger. Like there was finally room to breathe. I poured the flat beer down the sink, washed the glass, and made myself a proper dinner. Steak. Roasted potatoes. A salad with the good olive oil. I set the table with a real plate and a cloth napkin because I'd spent too many nights eating over the sink like I didn't deserve better. The steak was perfect. Medium rare. Seasoned just right. I ate slowly, tasted every bite, and didn't apologize to anyone for taking up space. After dinner, I did the dishes by hand instead of loading the dishwasher. Let the hot water run over my knuckles. Felt the slick of soap and the scratch of the sponge. There's a meditation in small tasks when you stop rushing through them. When I was done, I dried my hands and looked around the kitchen. It was clean. Quiet. Mine. That weekend, I did something I hadn't done in years. I called up some guys from the old neighborhood and we met at the bar on Hawthorne that still had the dartboard and the jukebox that played actual vinyl. We didn't talk about Rachel. We didn't talk about feelings. We threw darts and drank beer and argued about the Blazers and whether the new Marvel movie was any good. Normal things. Easy things. Around 10, my buddy Marcus leaned over and said, "You seem different, man. Lighter or something." I shrugged. Just got some clarity, I guess. He nodded like he understood even though I hadn't explained anything. That's what I'd been missing. People who didn't need the whole story to know you were going through it. People who showed up with darts and beer and didn't make you perform your pain for their comfort. When I got home, there was a text from Rachel. "Can we talk tomorrow?" I stared at it for a long time. Part of me wanted to say no. To let her sit in the uncertainty the way she'd let me sit in it for months. But I'm not built that way. Noon. Coffee shop on Belmont. Public place. She replied immediately. Okay. I set the phone down and went to bed without checking it again. I slept better than I had in weeks. No tossing. No waking up at 3 a.m. with my heart racing. Just solid, dreamless sleep that left me rested and ready. When I showed up at the coffee shop the next day, she was already there. She'd chosen a table in the back corner. Private but not hidden. Her hands were wrapped around a mug like she was trying to absorb its warmth. I ordered a black coffee and sat down across from her. We didn't hug. Didn't smile. Just looked at each other like two people meeting for a business transaction. I ended it, she said. First words out of her mouth. I sipped my coffee. Waited. I told Bryce I couldn't do it anymore. That it was wrong and I needed to figure out my marriage. I set the cup down carefully. When? 2 days ago. I did the math in my head. 2 days after I'd tagged Jennifer. 2 days after her world had consequences. Why now? She flinched at the question. Because I realized what I was losing. Or because you got caught. Her jaw tightened. That's not fair. Fair? I leaned back and let the words sit there. You want to talk about fair? You had an affair, Rachel. You lied to me for months. You spent our money on him. You posted photos for the world to see and didn't think I'd find out. So forgive me if I'm not handing out gold stars for ending it only after his wife knew. She looked down at her mug. I know I hurt you. You didn't hurt me, I said, and my voice stayed level. You betrayed me. There's a difference. Hurt is when you forget my birthday. Betrayal is when you build a whole second life and act like I'm the problem for noticing. A tear slid down her cheek. I didn't move to wipe it away. I don't know how to fix this, she whispered. Maybe you can't, I said. Maybe some things don't get fixed. They just get survived. She looked up at me then, really looked, and I saw something I hadn't seen in a long time. Fear. Not of me. Of the future. Of being alone. Of consequences that couldn't be charmed or explained away. Do you still love me? She asked. It was the same question I'd asked her, but reversed. I thought about it. Really thought. I love the person I married, I said finally. I don't know who you've become. We sat there for another hour. She apologized in circles. Explained the how but never quite landed on the why. Said she'd felt invisible. That I'd been working too much. That Bryce had made her feel seen. I listened without interrupting because I owed her that much. When she was done, I told her the truth as I saw it. That I had worked a lot, sure, but I'd been building something. That I'd asked her to come to the shop, to have lunch, to take walks, and she'd always been too busy. That feeling invisible wasn't an excuse to make someone else blind. She cried harder. Said she knew. Said she'd been selfish. Said all the words people say when the bill comes due. Finally, I stood up. I need time now, I said. Real time. Not a weekend. Not a week. I need to figure out if I can trust you again, and I can't do that with you in my ear every day telling me how sorry you are. How much time? She asked. I don't know. But I'll tell you when I do. I left her there with her cold coffee and her regrets and drove back to the shop. Jamie was under the hood of a Subaru, swearing at a stubborn bolt. I grabbed a wrench and helped him. We didn't talk. Just worked. Two men solving a problem that had a clear solution. When the bolt finally gave, we both grinned like we'd won something. That night, Jennifer Kellerman sent me a message on Instagram. Thank you for giving me the truth. I know it cost you too. I typed back, we both deserved better. She replied with a simple heart emoji. Not romantic. Just human. Just two people acknowledging that they'd been through the same storm and made it to shore. Over the next few weeks, I fell into a rhythm. Work. Gym. Meals I actually sat down for. I started reading again. Books I'd bought years ago and never opened. I fixed things around the house that had been broken so long I'd stopped seeing them. The loose cabinet hinge. The drip in the bathroom faucet. The front porch light that flickered. Each repair felt like taking something back. Rachel texted occasionally. Asked how I was. Sent articles she thought I'd like. I responded politely but didn't engage. I wasn't punishing her. I was protecting myself. There's a difference. One night, Marcus called and asked if I wanted to grab dinner. We went to a Thai place that had just opened up and ordered too much food. Halfway through the meal, he said, "You're doing good, man. I can tell." Yeah? Yeah. You're not pretending anymore. You're just being. I thought about that on the drive home. Pretending versus being. How much energy I'd spent pretending things were fine. Pretending I didn't notice. pretending my gut wasn't screaming at me every time she walked in smelling like someone else's cologne. Being was harder but cleaner. It didn't require a script. Around the 6-week mark, Rachel asked if we could meet again. Same coffee shop. Same table. This time she looked different. Thinner. Tired. Like the weight of what she'd done had finally settled on her shoulders. "I've been seeing a therapist," she said. "Good. She thinks we should do couples counseling. If you're open to it." I stirred sugar into my coffee even though I don't take sugar. Just needed something to do with my hands. "Are you doing it for you or for us?" "Both," she said. "I need to understand why I did what I did. But I also want to fight for this marriage. If you'll let me." I looked at her. Saw the woman I'd married flickering underneath the stranger she'd become. "I'll think about it," I said. "But I'm not making promises." She nodded. "That's fair." We finished our coffee in silence. When we walked out to the parking lot, she hesitated by her car. "Carter?" "Yeah?" "I really am sorry. I know that doesn't fix anything. But I need you to know I mean it." I nodded. "I believe you." And I did. I just didn't know if it mattered. That night, I sat on my back porch with a beer and my phone. I scrolled through Instagram and saw that Bryce Kellerman had deleted his entire account. Jennifer's was still up. She'd posted a photo of her and the kids at the coast. The caption read, "New beginnings." I double-tapped it. A small gesture. But it felt right. 2 months after I'd tagged Jennifer in those photos, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. When I answered, a man's voice said, "Is this Carter Mitchell?" "It is." "This is Bryce Kellerman." My hand tightened on the phone. "What do you want?" I wanted to apologize. I almost laughed. "You're about 10 weeks too late for that." "I know," he said, and he sounded tired. "I know I screwed up. I hurt a lot of people. My wife. My kids. You. Rachel. I just wanted you to know that I take responsibility for that." I leaned against the workbench and watched the sun slant through the shop windows. "You call Rachel and tell her that?" "No. She doesn't want to hear from me. But I figured you deserve to hear it." "Why now?" I asked. "Why call now?" He was quiet for a moment. "Because my son asked me if I was a bad person. And I didn't have a good answer. I didn't know what to say to that. Didn't know if I was supposed to absolve him or tell him to go to hell. So I just said, I hope you figure it out." "Yeah," he said. "Me too." He hung up. I set the phone down and stared at it for a long time. The apology didn't change anything. Didn't erase the photos or the lies or the nights I'd lain awake wondering if I was crazy for feeling what I felt. But it did something small. It closed a loop. Later that week, Rachel and I met with a couples therapist. A woman named Dr. Nguyen who had a calm voice and a way of asking questions that made you think before you answered. She didn't take sides. Didn't coddle. Just held up a mirror and made us look at what we'd built and what we'd broken. It was hard. Some sessions I left angry. Some sessions Rachel left in tears. But we kept going. Not because it was easy. Because it mattered. 3 months in, Dr. Nguyen asked us to do an exercise. We each had to write down what we wanted from the marriage moving forward. Not what we thought the other person wanted to hear. What we actually wanted. I wrote mine on a yellow legal pad in the shop after hours. I want honesty, even when it's uncomfortable. I want effort, not just apologies. I want a partner who chooses me every day, not just when the alternative falls apart. When we read them out loud in the next session, Rachel cried. But she didn't argue. She nodded. And then she read hers. "I want to be seen for who I am, not who you need me to be. I want to feel like I matter, not like I'm just part of your routine. I want to rebuild trust, even if it takes years." Dr. Nguyen looked at both of us and said, "You both want the same thing. You just forgot how to give it." We left that session and sat in the parking lot for a long time. Finally, Rachel said, "Do you think we can do this?" I looked at her. At the woman who'd broken my heart and was now trying to glue the pieces back together. "I don't know," I said. "But I'm willing to try." "Are you?" "Yes," she said. And for the first time in months, I believed her. We didn't move back in together right away. We took it slow. Dinners once a week. Then twice. Then weekends. We went to therapy every Thursday. We fought sometimes. Cried sometimes. Laughed sometimes. It wasn't perfect. But it was real. And real was something we could build on. 6 months after I'd tagged Jennifer Kellerman in those photos, I ran into her at the grocery store. She was in the cereal aisle with her kids. When she saw me, she smiled. "A real one. Carter." "Hi." "Hey, Jennifer." We made small talk. Her kids were doing well. She'd started a new job. She was dating someone, casually, nothing serious. She looked lighter. "How are you?" she asked. "Getting there," I said. "Rachel and I are working on things." She nodded. "I'm glad." "I really am." Before she walked away, she said, "You know, what you did that day, tagging me, it saved me a lot of time. I could have spent years wondering if I was crazy. So thank you." "You're not crazy," I said. "Neither of us are." She squeezed my arm and walked away with her cart. I stood there in the cereal aisle and felt something shift. Not closure. Just peace. The kind that comes when you realize you made the right call even when it was the hard one. When I got home, Rachel was in the kitchen making dinner. She looked up when I walked in and smiled. "How was the store?" "Good," I said. Ran into Jennifer. Her smile faltered for just a second. "How is she?" "She's good. Really good, actually." Rachel nodded and went back to chopping vegetables. We didn't talk about it more than that. We didn't need to. That night, after dinner, we sat on the back porch and watched the sunset. She reached for my hand. I let her take it. We didn't say anything. Just sat there in the quiet, two people who'd been through hell and were finally finding their way back. I don't know if we'll make it. I don't know if trust can be fully rebuilt after it's been shattered. But I know this, I didn't lose myself in the process. I didn't beg. I didn't shrink. I set a boundary and held it. And whether this marriage survives or not, I'll be okay. Because I remembered something important. My worth isn't tied to someone else's choices. It's tied to mine. And I choose to stand tall. If you've ever been where I was, scrolling through photos that gutted you, wondering if you were crazy for feeling what you felt, let me tell you something. You're not crazy. You're awake. And being awake is the first step to taking your life back. Drop a comment. Tell me where you're from. Tell me your story. And if this hit home, subscribe. Because tomorrow, I've got something even more raw lined up for you. We're not done building. We're just getting started. The first thing you learn about rebuilding is that it doesn't happen in straight lines. It happens in loops and setbacks and small victories that feel too small to celebrate until you look back and realize how far you've come. Rachel moved back in on a Saturday in November when the rain came down sideways and the gutters sang with overflow. We didn't make a ceremony of it. She pulled up in her sedan with 3 suitcases and a houseplant she'd been keeping at her sister's place. I helped carry the bags up the front steps while the neighbor's dog barked at the commotion. Inside, the house smelled like the chili I'd made that morning, slow-cooked with beans and ground beef and the kind of spices that make a place feel lived in. She set the plan on the kitchen counter and looked around like she was seeing it for the first time. Everything was where it had always been, but cleaner somehow. Tighter. I'd spent the last few months turning the house back into something I could be proud of, and it showed. We ate dinner at the table with plates that matched and napkins that weren't paper towels. The conversation was careful. She asked about the shop. I asked about her job. We skirted around the big topics the way people do when they're trying not to step on landmines. After we cleared the dishes, she went upstairs to unpack and I stayed in the kitchen, wiping down counters that were already clean. I could hear her moving around above me, drawers opening and closing, hangers scraping across the rod in the closet. It sounded normal. But normal was a costume we were both trying on to see if it still fit. That night, we slept in the same bed for the first time in months. She stayed on her side. I stayed on mine. There was a canyon of space between us that neither of us tried to cross. Around 2 in the morning, I woke up and heard her breathing, steady and deep, and felt something in my chest unclench just a little. She was here. We were trying. That had to count for something. The next morning, I woke to the smell of coffee and found her in the kitchen, already dressed, scrolling through her phone. She looked up when I walked in and gave me a small smile. It wasn't the smile from the early days, the one that used to light up a room. But it was hers, and it was real, and I took it. We drank our coffee in silence, the kind that felt less like avoidance and more like two people learning to be comfortable with quiet again. She had started going to therapy twice a week now. Individual sessions with a different counselor, someone who was helping her unpack why she'd done what she'd done. She didn't talk about it much, but sometimes she'd come home with red eyes and a distant look that told me the sessions were digging deep. I didn't press. Everyone's got to do their own work, and I respected that she was doing hers. Dr. Nguyen had given us homework. Small things designed to rebuild connection without forcing intimacy. One assignment was to cook a meal together once a week. Not order in. Not divide and conquer. Actually cook side by side, talking through the steps, tasting as we went, making something from scratch. The first time we tried it, we made lasagna. Rachel chopped onions while I browned the meat. She assembled the layers while I grated cheese. We moved around each other in the small kitchen, careful not to bump, not to crowd, but also not to disappear. When we finally pulled it out of the oven, golden and bubbling, we stood there for a moment just looking at it. She laughed, surprised. I think we actually did it. We sat down and ate, and for a little while, it felt like we were building something that might last. But not every day was lasagna. Some days were hard in ways I didn't expect. Like the morning I found a receipt in the pocket of one of her jackets. It was from a florist. Dated 4 months earlier. The same week she'd told me she was working late on a big project. I held it in my hand and felt the old anger rise up, hot and sharp. I wanted to storm into the bedroom and throw it at her. Demand an explanation. Make her feel the weight of every lie she'd told. But I didn't. I folded it back up, put it in my wallet, and waited until our next therapy session. When Dr. Nguyen asked if there was anything we needed to address, I pulled out the receipt and set it on the table between us. Rachel's face went pale. She didn't try to explain it away. She just looked at it and then at me and said, "I'm sorry. I know that doesn't cover it. But I am." Dr. Nguyen didn't let it sit there. She asked Rachel what the flowers were for. Rachel said they were for Bryce. For his birthday. She'd wanted to do something nice. The words landed like stones in water, heavy and sinking. Dr. Nguyen turned to me. "How does that make you feel, Carter?" I thought about it. Really thought. Angry, I said. But also tired. Tired of finding new pieces of the same story. Rachel started crying. Not the loud kind. The quiet kind that comes from shame. She said she'd told Dr. Nguyen everything in her individual sessions. Every detail. Every moment. She said she wasn't hiding anymore, but that didn't mean the past wasn't still surfacing. I asked her if there was anything else. Anything I didn't know. She shook her head. That was the last thing. I swear. I wanted to believe her. Part of me did. But trust is a plant that grows slow, And every time you find another weed, you have to decide whether to keep tending the garden or let it go wild. That night, we sat on the couch and she told me everything. Not the sanitized version. The real one. She told me how it started. A work event where Bryce had complimented her pitch. How he'd asked her to lunch to talk strategy. How the lunches turned into drinks. How the drinks turned into late-night texts. How the texts turned into something she convinced herself was just friendship until it wasn't. She told me about the first time they kissed. In his car after a client meeting. How guilty she'd felt. How she'd promised herself it wouldn't happen again. And then how it did. She told me about the hotel in Hood River. How they'd spent the weekend hiking and talking and pretending they were different people living different lives. She told me she'd felt alive in a way she hadn't in years, and then immediately said she knew how awful that sounded. I sat there and listened. Didn't interrupt. Didn't correct. Just let her empty the bag she'd been carrying. When she was done, she looked at me with eyes that were raw and red and said, "I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't even know if I forgive myself. But I need you to know I'm choosing you now. Not because he's gone. Because I finally see what I had and what I almost lost." I didn't say anything right away. I got up, went to the kitchen, and poured 2 glasses of water. Brought them back and handed her one. Then I said, "I appreciate you telling me. I do. But words are just the start. You have to show me. Every day. In the small things. That's how this works." She nodded and drank her water, and we sat there in the lamplight, 2 people on opposite sides of a bridge trying to figure out if it would hold their weight. The weeks that followed were a mix of progress and landmines. We had good days where we laughed over something stupid on TV or worked in the yard together, pulling weeds and trimming hedges like a regular couple. And we had bad days where a song would come on the radio or I'd see a post on social media that reminded me of what she'd done and I'd shut down, go quiet, retreat into myself. She learned to read those moments. Learned not to push. Learned to give me space and then gently come back when I was ready. It wasn't perfect. But it was honest. And honesty was the foundation we were trying to pour. One Saturday, we drove out to the coast. It was her idea. She said she wanted to get out of the city, away from the routines and the reminders, and just be together somewhere neutral. We packed a cooler with sandwiches and sparkling water and drove the 2 hours to Cannon Beach with the windows cracked and an old playlist humming through the speakers. When we got there, the beach was gray and windswept, the kind of day where most people stay inside. But we pulled on jackets and walked the sand, hands in our pockets, watching the waves roll in with their endless patience. She stopped at one point and picked up a piece of driftwood, smooth and pale from the salt and the sun. She turned it over in her hands and said, "Do you think we'll ever feel normal again?" I watched a seagull dive for something in the surf and said, "I don't know if normal is the goal. Maybe we're building something new." She looked at me, and I saw something I hadn't seen in a long time. Hope. Not the naive kind. The hard-earned kind. The kind that knows the cost and chooses to pay it anyway. We ate our sandwiches sitting on a log, the wind whipping our hair and the ocean roaring its approval. She told me about a project at work that was stressing her out. I told her about a classic Mustang that had come into the shop and how much I was enjoying the restoration. We talked like friends. Like partners. Like 2 people who were still figuring out how to be married but were willing to do the work. On the drive home, she fell asleep with her head against the window, and I glanced over at her and felt something shift. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But softness. A willingness to let the edges of my anger dull just a little. Back in the city, life kept moving. Jamie had started dating someone, a graphic designer named Avery who came by the shop sometimes to drop off lunch. They were young and easy with each other in a way that made me both nostalgic and a little envious. One afternoon, while we were rotating tires on a Tacoma, Jamie asked me if Rachel and I were doing okay. I appreciated the question. A lot of guys wouldn't ask. They'd just assume or avoid or make a joke to dodge the discomfort. "Yeah," I said. We're working on it. He nodded and handed me a lug nut. That's good, man. That's real good. We worked in silence for a while, and then he said, my parents split when I was 12. I always wondered if they could have made it if they'd tried harder. I looked at him. You think they didn't try? He shrugged. I think they tried different things. Just never at the same time. That hit me. Trying at the same time. That was the key, wasn't it? You could both want the marriage to work, but if you were pulling in different directions or on different days, it didn't matter. You had to sync up. Row together. Rachel and I were finally starting to do that. Thanksgiving came and we hosted her family. Her sister Diane showed up with her husband and their 2 kids, loud and chaotic in the way that makes a house feel full. Rachel had been nervous about it. Worried they'd judge her or judge me or make things awkward. But Diane hugged us both at the door and said, we're just glad you're still fighting for each other. The meal was good. Turkey, stuffing, mashed potatoes, the works. We sat around the table and passed dishes and told stories, and for a few hours, it felt like maybe we were going to be okay. After everyone left and the house was quiet again, Rachel and I tackled the dishes together. She washed. I tried. The rhythm was easy. Familiar. At one point, she bumped me with her hip and said, thank you for today. For what? For not giving up. I set down the dish towel and looked at her. I'm not giving up, Rachel. But I'm also not pretending. We've still got work to do. I know, she said. And I'm ready to do it. December brought rain and early sunsets and the kind of cold that seeps into your bones. The shop stayed busy with people needing winter prep. Oil changes, tire swaps, battery checks. I liked the predictability of it. The way every problem had a solution if you knew where to look. One evening, I got a message from Jennifer Kellerman. It had been months since we'd talked. The message was short. Hey Carter. Just wanted to check in. Hope you're doing well. I replied the next morning. Doing better. Hope you are too. She sent back a thumbs up and a smiley face, and that was it. No drama. No deep conversation. Just 2 people who'd been through something hard and come out the other side, checking in because it mattered. I showed Rachel the exchange. I wanted her to see it. Wanted her to know I wasn't hiding anything. She read it and handed the phone back. I'm glad she's okay. Me too, I said. And I meant it. Christmas was quiet. Just the 2 of us. We didn't go big with decorations or gifts. Rachel got me a new socket set I'd been eyeing. I got her a book by an author she loved and a gift card to the spa she used to go to before everything fell apart. We exchanged them on Christmas morning with coffee and cinnamon rolls, and it felt right. Simple. Honest. That afternoon, we drove around looking at lights, something we used to do in the early years. The neighborhoods were draped in color, yards filled with inflatable Santas and glowing reindeer. We didn't talk much. Just drove and looked and let the lights do their work. When we got home, she made hot chocolate and we sat on the couch under a blanket, her feet tucked up beside her, my arm resting along the back cushion. It wasn't passion. It wasn't fireworks. But it was comfort. And comfort was something I'd missed more than I realized. January came in cold and clear. New year, new intentions. Rachel and I had decided not to make big resolutions but to focus on small, daily commitments. She committed to being home by 6 unless she told me otherwise. I committed to putting my phone away during dinner. We committed to date night once a week, no exceptions. The first few date nights were awkward. We'd go to a restaurant and sit across from each other, searching for things to talk about that didn't circle back to the affair or the pain or the work we were doing. But by the 3rd week, something loosened. We started laughing again. Started telling stories. Started remembering why we'd liked each other in the first place. One night, we went to a comedy show downtown. The comedian was raunchy and absurd and we laughed until our sides hurt. On the way home, Rachel reached across the console and took my hand. I didn't pull away. By February, we'd fallen into a rhythm that felt sustainable. Not perfect, but steady. We still had hard conversations. Still had moments where old wounds reopened and we had to work through them. But we were doing it together. One night, after a particularly tough therapy session, we came home and she asked if we could just sit outside for a while. We grabbed a couple of blankets and sat on the back porch, even though it was freezing. The stars were out, sharp and bright against the black sky. She looked up and said, "Do you think we'll ever stop having to work at this?" I thought about it. "Maybe," I said. "Or maybe the work just gets easier." She nodded. "I can live with that." We sat there until our breath made clouds and our fingers went numb, and then we went inside and made tea and went to bed. That night, for the first time since she'd moved back in, I reached for her. Not for sex. Just to hold her. She turned into me and rested her head on my chest, and I felt her relax in a way she hadn't in months. We fell asleep like that, tangled together, and it felt like a turning point. March brought the first signs of spring. Buds on the trees. Longer days. A warmth in the air that made everything feel possible. Rachel had been doing well at work. She'd gotten a promotion and a raise, and she came home excited to tell me about it. We went out to celebrate, just the two of us, to a nice restaurant with white tablecloths and candles. Over dessert, she said, "I know I don't say this enough, but thank you." For what? For not walking away. For giving me a chance to prove I could be better. I set down my fork and looked at her. "I didn't do it for you, Rachel. I did it for me. Because I needed to know I tried everything before I let it go." She nodded, and I saw her eyes get glassy. "But I'm glad I did. I'm glad we did." She reached across the table and took my hand, and this time, I squeezed back. The shop had a record month in March. Word of mouth was strong, and we were booked solid. Jamie had stepped up in a big way, taking on more responsibility and showing real skill. I'd started thinking about making him a partner down the line. One afternoon, a guy came in with a '72 Chevy truck that had been sitting in his barn for a decade. He wanted it restored. It was a massive project, the kind that would take months and cost more than most people wanted to spend. But he had the budget and the patience, and I had the passion. I took it on. Working on that truck became a kind of meditation. Stripping it down to the frame, rebuilding the engine, fabricating parts that didn't exist anymore. Every bolt I turned, every panel I straightened, felt like I was putting something back together. Not just the truck. Myself. Rachel started coming by the shop more often. She'd bring lunch or just stop in to say hi. At first, it felt forced, like she was trying too hard. But over time, it became natural. She'd lean against the workbench and watch me work, asking questions about what I was doing, genuinely interested. One day, she asked if she could help. I handed her a sanding block and showed her how to smooth out a section of the fender. She worked carefully, focused, and when she was done, she stepped back and admired her work with a grin. "I did that," she said. "You did," I said. "And it looks good." She laughed, and it was the laugh I remembered. The one that had made me fall for her in the first place. By April, we'd hit a milestone. 6 months since she'd moved back in. 6 months of therapy, hard conversations, small victories, and occasional setbacks. Dr. Nguyen asked us how we felt about where we were. Rachel said she felt hopeful. Like we were finally building something real. I said I felt cautiously optimistic. Like we'd done the hard part but couldn't get complacent. Dr. Nguyen smiled. "That's exactly where you should be. Hopeful but realistic. Keep doing what you're doing." On the drive home, Rachel said, "Do you think we'll ever stop going to therapy?" I shrugged. Maybe. Or maybe it just becomes part of the routine. Like oil changes. She laughed. "That's the most you thing you've ever said." I grinned. You married a mechanic. What did you expect? That weekend, we hosted a small gathering at the house. Marcus and his wife, Jamie and Avery, Diane and her husband. Nothing fancy. Just burgers on the grill and beer in the cooler and people we cared about. It was the first time we'd had people over since everything had happened, and I wasn't sure how it would go. But it went well. Easy. People laughed and told stories and nobody brought up the past. At one point, I looked across the yard and saw Rachel talking to Avery, both of them laughing at something on Avery's phone, and I felt a swell of gratitude. We were here. We'd made it this far. That was something. As the sun set and people started to leave, Marcus pulled me aside. You two seem good, he said. We're getting there, I said. He clapped me on the shoulder. I'm proud of you, man. You could have burned it all down. But you didn't. You built. I didn't know what to say to that, so I just nodded. After everyone left, Rachel and I cleaned up together. She carried plates inside while I collapsed the tables. When we were done, we stood in the kitchen and she said, "Today was nice." It was, I said. She stepped closer and wrapped her arms around me. I held her, and for the first time in a long time, it didn't feel like we were holding on out of desperation. We were holding on because we wanted to. May brought warm weather and a sense of momentum. The Chevy restoration was coming along. I'd finished the bodywork and moved on to the interior. Rachel had taken up running again, something she'd loved before we got married but had let slide. She'd asked if I wanted to join her, and even though running wasn't my thing, I said yes. We started slow. Just a couple miles around the neighborhood. She was patient with me, didn't push, and we'd walk when I needed to catch my breath. But by the end of the month, I was keeping up. We'd run in the mornings before work, the streets still quiet, the air cool and clean. It became our time. No phones. No distractions. Just the rhythm of our feet hitting pavement and the sound of our breathing syncing up. One morning, after a particularly good run, we stopped at a coffee cart and got lattes. We sat on a bench in the park and watched the sun climb over the trees. Rachel said, "I feel like myself again. Like I'm finally waking up from a bad dream." I looked at her. You are yourself. You just lost your way for a while. She nodded. I'm glad you didn't give up on me. I'm glad you didn't give up on yourself, I said. That matters more. She leaned her head on my shoulder, and we sat there until our coffee went cold. June marked a year since I found that first photo on Instagram. A year since I'd tagged Jennifer Kellerman and set everything in motion. I thought about how much had changed. How much we'd been through. How much we'd rebuilt. Rachel didn't know the exact date, and I didn't tell her. It wasn't something that needed to be marked. It was just a day. A reminder of where we'd been and how far we'd come. That evening, I took her to the coast. The same beach we'd gone to back in the fall. But this time, the sun was shining. The sand was warm. The water sparkled. We walked the shoreline, hand in hand, and talked about the future. About maybe taking a real vacation. About maybe trying to start a family. About all the things that felt possible now that we'd done the work. At one point, she stopped and turned to me. I love you, Carter. I know I haven't said it enough. But I do. I looked at her. At the woman who'd broken me and then helped me rebuild. At the woman who'd done her own rebuilding and come out stronger. I love you too, Rachel. And I mean that. She kissed me, and it was soft and sweet and full of promise. When we pulled apart, she said, "Thank you for not giving up. Thank you for fighting." I said. We both did. And that's why it worked. We stayed at the beach until the sun started to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple. Then we drove home, windows down, music playing, two people who'd survived a storm and come out the other side. Not unscathed. But together. And that was enough. The Chevy restoration finished on a Tuesday in late July. I'd spent 14 months on that truck, turning rust and regret into something that purred like a contented cat. When I fired up the engine for the final time, the owner stood there with tears in his eyes. "This was my dad's truck," he said. "You brought it back to life." I shook his hand and felt the weight of what that meant. Some things are worth saving. Some things deserve a second chance. That truck was one of them. Maybe my marriage was too. Rachel had been working on something of her own. She'd started writing. Not for work, but for herself. Essays about mistakes and growth and the messy work of becoming better. She showed me one on a Sunday morning while we drank coffee on the porch. It was raw and honest and painful to read. She wrote about the affair without sugarcoating it. About the selfishness and the thrill and the crushing guilt that followed. About how she'd almost destroyed the best thing in her life because she'd confused excitement with happiness. When I finished reading, I handed it back and said, "This is good. You should share it." She looked uncertain. "You think?" "I think there are people out there who need to hear this. Who need to know they're not the only ones who screwed up and are trying to make it right." She ended up posting it on a blog she started. Anonymous at first. Just her words and her truth. The response was overwhelming. People commented with their own stories. Thanked her for being honest. Told her she'd given them hope. She showed me the comments one night, her face lit up with something I hadn't seen in years. Purpose. She'd turned her worst mistake into something that helped others, and watching that transformation was one of the most beautiful things I'd ever witnessed. We were both becoming different versions of ourselves. Not the people we were before. But something newer. Something tested. August brought an unexpected visitor. Jennifer Kellerman called and asked if she could stop by the shop. She was in Portland for a work conference and wanted to see me in person. I said yes. When she arrived, she looked different. Lighter. Her hair was shorter. She wore a confident smile that hadn't been there the last time we'd spoken. We grabbed coffee from the cart down the street and sat on the bench outside the shop. She told me she'd gotten remarried. To a man she'd known from college who'd moved back to the area. Someone kind and steady who'd been there while she picked up the pieces. "I'm happy for you," I said, and meant it. She asked about Rachel and me. I told her we were doing well. That it had been hard but worth it. She nodded. "I'm glad. You both deserve that." Before she left, she said something that stayed with me. "You know what you did that day, tagging me in those photos, it wasn't just about exposing them. It was about refusing to be invisible. A lot of people would have just suffered in silence. But you spoke up. You took action. And that changed everything for both of us." I thought about that after she drove away. About how easy it would have been to just accept it. To pretend I didn't see what I saw. To make myself smaller so someone else could feel bigger. But I hadn't done that. And neither had she. We'd both chosen ourselves when it mattered most. September came with cooler air and the start of football season. Marcus invited us over for a game, and it felt good to settle into the rhythms of normal life. Rachel and Marcus's wife got along well, trading recipes and laughing over stories from their respective jobs. At halftime, Marcus and I stood in the driveway, beers in hand, and he said, "You two made it, man." Not a lot of couples would have. I looked back at the house, at Rachel visible through the window, animated and smiling. "Yeah," I said. "We did." He clenched his bottle against mine. "Here's to second chances." "Here's to doing the work," I said. Because that's what it really was. October marked the season of change. Leaves turning. Temperatures dropping. A year of therapy under our belts. Dr. Nguyen suggested we could start spacing out our sessions. Go from weekly to bi-weekly to monthly. She said we'd built a strong foundation and had the tools to keep building on our own. Rachel and I talked about it on the drive home. "What do you think?" she asked. "I think we've come a long way," I said. but I don't want to get cocky. Let's do bi-weekly for a while and see how it feels. She agreed. That night, we celebrated with takeout and a movie, curled up on the couch like we used to. Like we were learning to again. The holidays came around again, and this time they felt different. Lighter. We hosted Thanksgiving and Christmas both, and the house filled with family and laughter and the kind of chaos that makes you grateful for what you have. On New Year's Eve, we stayed home. Just the two of us. We made a nice dinner, opened a bottle of wine, and at midnight, we stood on the back porch and watched fireworks light up the neighborhood sky. She kissed me as the colors burst overhead, and I kissed her back, and it felt like a promise we were both finally ready to keep. January of the new year brought reflection. I found myself thinking about where we'd been and where we were going. The shop was thriving. Jamie had officially become a partner, and we were talking about expanding to a fourth bay. Rachel's blog had grown. She'd been invited to speak at a few events about relationships and redemption. She was nervous but excited, and I was proud of her. We'd both taken our pain and turned it into something productive. Something that mattered. One evening in late January, we sat down and made a list of goals for the year. Not resolutions. Goals. Rachel wanted to finish writing a book based on her blog. I wanted to restore another classic car and maybe take a weekend trip every month. Together, we wanted to keep investing in our marriage. Keep showing up. Keep choosing each other. We hung the list on the fridge and looked at it every morning. A reminder of what we were building. February brought Valentine's Day, and for the first time in years, it didn't feel loaded. We went to dinner at the restaurant where we'd celebrated her promotion. Ordered the same dessert. Held hands across the table. She gave me a card that said, "Thank you for seeing me at my worst and choosing to see my best." I gave her one that said, "Thank you for doing the work. For fighting. For staying." We didn't need flowers or grand gestures. We just needed to be there, present and honest. And we were. By March, I realized something important. I'd forgiven her. Not in some dramatic moment with tears and declarations. But quietly. Over time. Through 1,000 small choices to let go of the anger and choose the relationship instead. Forgiveness wasn't a switch. It was a process. And somewhere along the way, I'd walk through it and come out the other side. I told her one night after dinner. "I've forgiven you," I said. She looked at me, surprised. "You have?" I nodded. "I have. It doesn't mean I've forgotten. But I'm not carrying it anymore." She started crying, the good kind, and said, "I've been waiting to hear that. Thank you." I hugged her and felt the last bit of heaviness lift. Spring arrived with blossoms and new beginnings. We planted a garden in the backyard. Tomatoes and peppers and herbs. We worked the soil together, laughing when we got dirty, high-fiving when we got the rows straight. It was simple work, but it felt symbolic. We were planting something that would grow if we tended it. Just like our marriage. Every weekend, we'd go out and water and weed and watch the little green shoots push through the earth. It became our ritual. Our reminder. By the time summer rolled around again, we'd made it. 2 full years since the affair had ended. A year and a half since she'd moved back in. We were stronger than we'd ever been. Not because the affair hadn't happened, but because we'd faced it head-on and refused to let it define us. One Saturday, we drove back to the coast. The same beach. The same stretch of sand where we'd had so many important conversations. But this time, there was no heaviness. Just peace. We walked the shoreline, collected shells, and talked about maybe renewing our vows someday. Not because we had to, but because we wanted to. Because we'd earned it. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in gold and fire, Rachel turned to me and said, "Do you ever regret it? Staying? Fighting for us?" I looked at her. At the woman who'd broken me and then helped me heal. At the woman who'd done her own healing and become someone I was proud to stand beside. "No," I said. I don't. Do you? She shook her head. Not even a little. This, right here, is the best thing I've ever fought for. We stood there as the waves rolled in hand, two people who'd been through hell and chosen each other anyway. Chosen growth. Chosen honesty. Chosen love that was harder and deeper and more real than anything we'd known before. The story didn't end with fireworks. It ended with a quiet knowing that some things break so they can be rebuilt stronger. That trust can be earned back if both people are willing to do the work. That forgiveness is possible, even when it seems impossible. And that sometimes, the hardest choice, the choice to stay and fight, is the one that changes everything. We drove home as the stars came out, the windows down, the music low. Rachel reached over and took my hand, and I held it. Not because I had to. Because I wanted to. Because after everything, we'd found our way back to each other. And that was worth more than any easy love ever could be. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.